This video contains spoilers for the featured film. All images used belong to their respective copyright owners and are used here for commentary and criticism purposes only. Please remember that statements made are my own opinion and you are free to disagree in the comments, but please do so respectfully. Hey there, Alley Cats, and welcome to the revival of Movie Monday. This is a series I did on my channel quite a long time ago, which was one of my favorites. And today, for the comeback of this series, I figured what better review to do than for probably the most highly anticipated movie of this century, which is, of course, Avengers Endgame, a 2019 Marvel superhero film. Now, I'll be honest, I had to do a lot of preparation leading up to this movie to be able to see it in theaters on opening day, because at this point, 2 weeks ago, I had only seen 3 of the 21 previous movies in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So by the time I decided to make this video, I didn't have much time to get through this series, and I watched all of them in chronological order, not in the order they were released, which I personally think was a really good call. And if you haven't seen all of them for yourself, there may be references to people or events in this video that you might not understand. Perhaps eventually I'll go through each film individually in more detail, but for now, I just want to give some brief thoughts about the series overall. There were quite a lot of high points to the series for me, particularly the big fight scene in Captain America Civil War, the entirety of Thor Ragnarok and Guardians of the Galaxy 2, Spider-Man Homecoming, actually any scenes with Spider-Man. Tom Holland is always a good time, and Thanos as a very effective villain. Parts I didn't like, however, were the latter half of Iron Man 3, especially Pepper Potts overall throughout the franchise, various parts of Thor the Dark World, the Incredible Hulk, like the whole thing, the beginning of Captain Marvel before she goes to Earth and meets Nick Fury, the beginning of Doctor Strange before he goes to Nepal, and the character of Michelle Jones aka MJ in Spider-Man Homecoming. Though I certainly have to give some credit to the filmmakers throughout the Marvel Cinematic Universe, the MCU has been created over the course of the past 11 years. It has definitely improved as time went on, and Marvel Studio really gained their footing quickly with this franchise and realized the scope of what they could do and how to make sure the fans have an enjoyable time. Out of all these movies, even the ones that, in my opinion, had a fair amount of problems, there wasn't a single one that I outright hated and regretted taking the time to watch. The characters especially really help make these films what they are, and after a few recastings, I think everyone fits into their roles perfectly. Anyways, I think I've rambled on long enough. Let's get into what you guys are really here for, my review of Avengers Endgame. All Movie Mondays, including this one, will be split into 3 separate sections: plot overview, overall thoughts, and how I would fix it. If you would like to skip the plot synopsis and go straight into the review, please go to this timestamp in the video. So with that said, let's get right into it. As the movie begins, we see Clint living a normal home life with his wife and children when they all but him disappear with the snap, and he desperately searches around for his family. So that's how you're gonna start this Marvel. I see how it is. Getting the feels going quite early. 3 weeks later, we see Tony Stark and Nebula trapped in deep space following their defeat against Thanos, but they are rescued by Carol Danvers. Once they are back on Earth, they, along with Natasha, Bruce, Steve, Rocket, Rhodes, and Thor, track down Thanos to an uninhabited planet where he is living alone. They ambush him and take the gauntlet, but the stones are missing. He says he used the stones a second time to destroy them so no one can undo his actions. He tells them no matter what they do, he is inevitable and will always win, so Thor decapitates him in a rage. 5 years later, holy time jump, everyone is still struggling to deal with such a significant loss. Scott Lang escapes the quantum realm where he was trapped when half the population disappeared, including Hope and her parents. After reuniting with his daughter Cassie, he goes to the Avengers headquarters where Natasha and Steve are. He explains that although 5 years have passed in reality, for him in the quantum realm it was only 5 hours, and suggests if they had a way to do so, they could go back in time through the quantum realm and stop Thanos from wiping out half the universe. The three visit Tony, who now has a daughter named Morgan, and ask him to help build a time machine. Fearing how altering the past would affect his family, he refuses. So they go to Bruce, who has now essentially combined his normal self with the Hulk so he can appear as the Hulk but still act as himself. And he informs them that traveling back in time and altering the past will not change the future, but instead create an alternate timeline. Take that, Back to the Future, and pretty much any other movie that involves time travel. They attempt to make their own time machine but are unsuccessful. Tony contemplates the loss of Peter Parker and is able to create a successful model for the time machine, so after discussing with Pepper, he reconsiders and goes to help the other Avengers. Natasha goes to Japan to recruit Clint, who has been going around the world acting as a vigilante assassin. Bruce and Rocket go to find Thor, who has become a fat alcoholic slob. And after some argument, he agrees to join as well. They formulate a plan to go to the past and collect the Infinity Stones and return to the present and bring everyone back. Because they have a limited amount of Pym particles that power the suits like the one Scott wears as Ant-Man, they will be able to make the trip to the past and back only once per person. They split into groups, and throughout the movie they cut from person to person during various scenes, but to make it easier on myself and you, I'm just going to explain what happens in full, one location at a time, to avoid confusion having to jump around to different people, locations, and times. Starting with Tony, Steve, Bruce, and Scott, they travel back to 2012 New York, right in the middle of the battle from the first Avengers film. Bruce goes to the Sanctum Sanctorum for the Time Stone, but the Ancient One initially refuses, telling him that taking the stone would destroy their timeline, since Doctor Strange would later use it to defeat Dormammu and prevent him from obliterating the planet. But Bruce is able to convince her by informing her that Doctor Strange had willingly given the Time Stone to Thanos in his timeline after seeing all the possible futures and only viewing one where the Avengers are able to win. So she believes he must have known this sequence of events would happen. She gives him the stone, but only under the promise that they will return all of them once they're done. Once the battle wraps up and Loki is captured, the remaining three split up to get the Space and Mind Stones. Scott shrinks down and pulls a circuit in past Tony's artificial heart, causing him to drop the briefcase containing the Space Stone, which present Tony snatches up while no one is looking. But before he is able to leave, he is accidentally knocked over by Hulk, who is throwing a tantrum about having to take the stairs instead of riding in the elevator with everyone else. In the commotion, Loki grabs the stone and teleports away. This feels like it should be really important, but it is literally never mentioned again. Meanwhile, Steve boards an elevator full of Hydra members acting as SHIELD operatives, which at the time of the first movie, the Avengers were not aware of yet. He pretends to be working for Hydra as well, so they hand over the Mind Stone, but he runs into his past self, who mistakes him for Loki in disguise. The two scuffle, but present Steve is able to win and leave with the stone. Having lost the Space Stone, Tony and Steve decide to use the remaining Pym particles to travel further back in time to 1970 New Jersey to steal the Space Stone from an army base, along with more vials of Pym particles from Hank's lab to travel back to the present. In the process, Steve stumbles into Peggy's office and sees her, though they do not interact, and Tony has a conversation with his father. Thor and Rocket travel to 2013 Asgard, the timeline of Thor: The Dark World, to obtain the Reality Stone from Jane Foster as she is infected with the ether. Thor has a run-in with his mother, who will die a short while later in this timeline. She recognizes he is from the future, so they have a talk and she comforts him about his failures. Rocket gets the stone from Jane, but before they leave, Thor grabs his hammer to bring with him. Natasha and Clint travel to 2014 Vormir to get the Soul Stone, and same when Thanos got it, Red Skull appears and informs them they can only acquire it by sacrificing someone they love. They fight over who will sacrifice themselves, each insisting that the other should live, but ultimately it is Natasha who jumps off the cliff to her death, leaving Clint with the Soul Stone. And finally, Rhodes and Nebula travel to Morag in the same year to retrieve the Power Stone before Peter Quill is able to steal it. Meanwhile, past Thanos, Gamora, and Nebula are also searching for Infinity Stones. They discover that past Nebula's network is shared with present Nebula, and they're able to access her memories and see everything that's happened. Rhodes and present Nebula easily get the stone, but as Rhodes returns to the present, Nebula malfunctions as her memories are projected through past Nebula, and Thanos learns he will be successful in his mission. So they go to Morag and capture present Nebula. Past Nebula disguises herself as present Nebula, as if this wasn't already convoluted enough, and travels to the present along with the other Avengers now that they've acquired all the stones. Once everyone is in the present, they construct a new gauntlet to insert the stones into it. They discuss who will be the one to use it, and Bruce decides he will since he is the strongest and most likely will be able to withstand the gamma radiation emitted from it. He snaps his fingers and it's confirmed it works when Clint gets a call from his wife. But now that past Nebula has infiltrated the Avengers headquarters, she uses the time machine to transport Thanos and his army to the present, and they unleash an attack. Back on the ship, Gamora asks present Nebula about their future, and Nebula convinces her to fight against Thanos. In the wreckage of the Avengers base, Clint finds the gauntlet and runs with it as he's being pursued by a group of Thanos' minions. He gets away and hands off the gauntlet to past Nebula without realizing, and she is about to shoot him, but she is killed by her present counterpart, accompanied by Gamora. Thor, Tony, and Steve go to confront Thanos. Now that he sees that the remaining population remembers what he did and wants to undo it, he resolves to now destroy the entire universe and build a new one that will be grateful to him. As they fight, Steve saves Thor by wielding his own hammer, but Thanos is still too strong and overpowers them, then begins summoning his army. In that moment, Doctor Strange creates many portals and literally everyone comes to fight. And by everyone, I mean everyone. All of the revived Avengers and Guardians of the Galaxy, Doctor Strange's fellow sorcerers, the armies of Asgard and Wakanda, even Pepper shows up to fight in her own superpowered suit. They bring everyone together for the final battle, during which Tony is reunited with Peter Parker and Peter Quill is reunited with Gamora, though in her timeline they hadn't met yet, so she doesn't exactly give him the warmest reception. Wanda targets Thanos in vengeance for killing Vision, and just as he's about to be overpowered, he instructs his forces on the ship to fire indiscriminately onto the battlefield, but Carol arrives and quickly destroys the ship. They play hot potato with the gauntlet, passing it from person to person to keep it away from Thanos' minions, but eventually he is still able to grab it. He and Tony struggle for it, and Tony manages to snatch the stones out of the gauntlet and activate them in his own suit. Thanos repeats his line from earlier, "I am inevitable," and Tony simply says, "I am Iron Man," and snaps his fingers, disintegrating Thanos' army along with the big man himself. But the energy blast from the gauntlet gravely injures Tony, and he has just enough time to say goodbye to Peter and Pepper before he dies. The light from the arc reactor on his chest fades away. Afterwards, they hold a funeral for Tony, and his artificial heart from the first movie is sent floating out to sea, and everyone proceeds to go their separate ways. Clint returns to his family, Peter Parker goes back to school, Gamora has gone missing, and Thor appoints Valkyrie as Queen of Asgard and joins the Guardians of the Galaxy along with Nebula. Steve is sent back in time to return all the Infinity Stones to their proper timelines, but when he's expected to return, nothing happens. He instead appears in the distance as an old man, having chosen to remain in the past and live out his life with Peggy, and passes on his shield to Sam Wilson. There is no post-credits scene like in the other MCU movies. However, at the end of the credits, there is the sound of Tony constructing his very first Iron Man suit. Tell you guys, I'm usually not the biggest fan of superhero movies, with some exceptions. I don't often go out of my way to watch them, which is why I wasn't fully caught up with the MCU until a couple weeks ago. But this was an excellent movie, and probably the best way they could end the Avengers series. It was quite an experience to watch all of the movies, including this one, for the first time in such a short time frame, rather than out of chronological order over the course of 11 years. It really speaks to the filmmakers' abilities to have probably the most hyped movie ever. All previous box office records have been obliterated, and I've never seen an audience so passionate about a franchise. There were so many theories leading up to the premiere, and there's endless ways this could have gone, but the Russo brothers really made sure to create a film that would satisfy the fans and end it on the right note, which about 95% of the time the fan service turned out really well, but I have to say it is not perfect. I know, already now I've massively pissed off some super fans. I'm gonna have to sleep with one eye open tonight, but just hear me out. A few parts definitely seem rather forced, particularly the part where Captain America is able to lift Thor's hammer, which I remember because I just saw these movies like last week where all of the Avengers attempted to lift it previously, but no one else could, including Steve. So I don't know why he's suddenly able to pick it up other than to have one of many super epic moments throughout the final battle. Speaking of which, another really forced and cliche final battle moment was in the middle of the fight when Spider-Man was handing off the gauntlet to Captain Marvel. He asks how she is going to get through the horde of Thanos' minions, and then all the female characters gather around her to do their fight stance and confidently announce she's got support, and then go off to battle some more. I mean, don't get me wrong, I love a good girl power moment, but I feel like it could have been integrated a lot better, just to make it more natural that doesn't take it out of the intensity of the final battle, because cliches like that, which go too over the top, just snap me out of the moment and remind me, oh right, this is just a movie. Another prominent issue that plagues this film, along with many others, is the concept of time travel. Obviously, that's something that's essential to this plot, but it's something that's very difficult to do well consistently and effectively. They say going back in time and messing with the past won't change the future and just make alternate timelines, which is an okay explanation, but it doesn't prevent it from opening plot holes and causing problems. The part that bothers me the most is when Tony loses the Tesseract in the past and Loki picks it up and teleports away. But that's the last we see or hear about it, and that's a point that's just completely glossed over. I mean, what happened? Is Loki suddenly alive now? Did it create an alternate timeline even though the Ancient One specifically warned this could have devastating consequences? Are there now duplicate Avengers in another reality? Is there a second Loki that's going to make an appearance in future films? According to the rules set by the movie, this is a major problem, but this isn't addressed at all. And it's not mentioned that Captain America fixed the timeline when he went back to the past to return all the Infinity Stones. So it seems like either they left the door open to bring Loki back at some point, or they just left a glaring plot hole with this loose end that never really got tied up. And I feel like killing the Thanos that teleported in from the past should cause some issues, and definitely Steve staying in the past and showing up in the present as an old man throws a huge wrench in the established rules, but just the concept of time travel gets so convoluted, there's a multitude of possibilities and things that could go wrong and be thrown off course. But for the most part, those were really my only complaints about the movie. It was incredibly enjoyable the entire way through, and I would definitely have just as good of a time watching it again. The end battle was so magnificent and gloriously epic in all sorts of ways. Even the first 10 minutes or so were also very intense when they cut off Thanos' arm to remove the gauntlet and then Thor straight up decapitating him out of frustration. It's so dark and serious. This movie lets you know from the very beginning it's getting real. And of course, the double satisfaction of killing off the main villain twice within the same movie. You never really see that, so I certainly can't complain about that. Just like the rest of the series, the cast does a spectacular job, and this movie just gives you all the feels. There's a great balance of humor and dramatic moments, and there's for sure a strong sense of nostalgia for longtime viewers when everyone travels back in time to major events in the series. I laughed, I cried happy tears, I cried sad tears, I cheered, and while there are some more minor faults, it does not take away from the experience as a whole. For me, this is the best MCU movie so far, and I know there are more being planned for individual characters, but to be honest, I really hope that as far as the Avengers go, they just leave it right here. Because in my opinion, making another Avengers film would only take away a lot from this movie. So first things first, definitely fix the cliches and parts that feel forced that I mentioned earlier. Like when Carol is about to fight, have some of the female characters notice that she might need help and run over and be like, I've got your back, or something. Nothing that disrupts the flow and momentum of the movie, especially during the freaking climax of the film. It is more of a minor problem, but even slight improvements can add to the overall quality. As far as the time travel goes, it's such a tricky thing to work with and keep consistent throughout a film over the course of several hours that really the only way to fix it would be to ditch the concept altogether, but I'm not sure what could be a suitable replacement to recover the Infinity Stones. Perhaps maybe some way to repair the stones after they're destroyed by Thanos, but then going that route would prevent the film from having a proper antagonist, which would significantly lower the tension and severity of each situation the characters are faced with. But at the very least, they could adhere to the rules they set for time travel from the beginning, but again, that would still require several scenes to be rewritten. Part of me also wants to include more fighting, which is an odd thing to say considering this is already a 3-hour movie, but for the most part, it was only just the one huge fight at the end, and there's so many faces crammed into it that they can only focus on each person for a few seconds. The battle itself has some nice pacing and isn't packed too full of jump cuts like many other action movies, don't get me wrong, but I do think there should have been more. I mean, this is the last time everyone's gonna be together like this. Give me more, damn it! Also, with so many characters to follow during the time heist, I think it would have been a lot easier to follow to just watch the events of one group at a time until they obtain their respective stone, rather than watching a little of Group A, then cutting to Group B for a few minutes, then jumping to Group C, then back to Group A, but now we've gotta see what's up with Group D, then head back over to Group C, and on and on and on for about a couple hours. I don't mind a reasonable amount of cutting between events, but only if the movie isn't already stuffed to capacity with characters. This again is more of a minor adjustment, and this really doesn't affect the movie in a negative way to keep it as it is. I just thought it was worth mentioning. There's another part towards the end I specifically wanted to mention during Tony's funeral, because as they pan over all of the funeral goers, there's this one teenage boy towards the back who really stuck out to me because I did not recognize him at all. And especially since I had seen all of the movies recently, I was doing a pretty good job at remembering everybody's face. And from that point until the credits rolled, it bothered me because in the back of my mind, I was still thinking, who the heck is this dude? Obviously, he was important enough to attend Tony's funeral, but for the life of me, I could not place him anywhere. Even when we got out of the theater, I was scouring the internet for like an hour before I realized he was the kid from Iron Man 3 who helped fix Tony's suit, which once I found that out was actually a nice cameo, but obviously, since now he's grown up from a child, he looks completely different from when we last saw him. So maybe it's just me, but it would have been helpful to at least acknowledge him in some way. But overall, I think that's really the only aspects I can think of to improve on. The filmmakers did a phenomenal job, and I'm sure there's no way I could ever come up with something better. So with that said, I give Avengers Endgame my personal rating of 8 out of 10. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below, and if you have any suggestions for movies I should discuss and review in the future. I am so excited to be bringing this series back to my channel, and I hope you guys are too. It's gonna be a wonderful time. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe if you have not already. And until next time, I will see you guys later. Bye!